You were to go to the website and check and do that every time. If you want the link, I just loaded the random image I was working on a while ago. Put down mouse, but trying to get back to it, but um, my tablet's not working, so I can offer anything. You have weird errors. I can actually start it. So yeah, hey Darby, how's it going, man?
No, not too bad.
So so you're working on a concept for another concept for laser.
Yeah, working on it.
We're talking about those things being. I mean, if you design like a laser that actually better. If you were designing something like you said, the capacitor is gonna explode very easily.
Yeah,
So how are you overcoming that? Even if it's sci-fi, like you're still trying to put like make sense of it,
right.
right?
Well, my understanding is, I don't know if you've seen the thing. Is it called Hyper or something like that? The big ass laser that they have on like the back of a 5-ton truck that can like melt an engine block from a mile away.
Yeah, don't they use that for like ICBMs and shit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, that thing, they said the capacitors for that thing need like 5 guys to lift them.
Damn.
And fully charged, like they weigh a lot more when they're charged than they do when they're not charged, right? Because they're full of free electrons.
Right.
So,
And it's a
so it's
chemical charge.
weird,
It's a
like
chemical thing.
right, and it's
So
weird
there's
because
mass.
it's almost like the weapon would get heavier as you like charged it up, which is interesting
Well,
because
no.
it's
If you think about it as weapons, it's like what's heavier, an empty mag or a full mag?
well, right, true.
Yeah.
But
So
here's my question: is it's drawing power from like say you have a microfusion reactor. Let's just like throw that out as an option, like a cold fusion reactor,
sure.
as like say pop can size or something like that. Um, Assuming that we've gone that far and into the future or whatever, like if you had a power supply like that supplying the power to charge the capacitors,
Yeah.
like where would all those electrons be coming from, or would it just be exciting them and aligning them but they're already in there? Because that's not technically a chemical charge, that's nuclear at this point.
Yeah, cause like in games, like most of the time they just do. You have the traditional kind of hard shell ammunition or missiles, whatever it is that you fire like a projectile, and you just like
Mm-hmm.
you have it. It's a stone, and you throw it. You know, but
Right.
usually when in game, and this is in games, right? But usually when you deal with energy weapons, you either have a battery, which is pretty much kind of it's pretty realistic, or you have this cool mechanic of a thing that recharges, which for certain things is more fun. It can be more fun. I don't know. I think so. It's interesting because Mass Effect One had that. Like you just you know you fire and it like you run out of energy. I think, or maybe you overheat or something. I think it
It
was
was the
overheat.
heat sinks, like you had to let them cool down or whatever before you
Yeah,
could
but
fire
then
more.
but your ammo is unlimited.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
but
that was because it was like, I don't know, it was some sort of explanation they had where it was like a block of metal and you're shaving off like microscopic like slivers
no,
of
that was
it
a
and it was
specific. I think
projecting
that
that.
was a specific weapon, right? I don't know, because you had your default gun and then you had other guns you could pick up. But then in Mass Effect 2, they were like they still had all that stuff in the lore, so but they
But
didn't
it
want to
was
do it
injectable
anymore.
heat sinks. Right.
So they wanted to go back to the traditional like ammo stuff, but all that shit was already in the lore. So they're like, oh, actually, we have like yeah, the heat sinks, the batteries. They basically you had a magazine except for ammo, it was just the heat sink, so you could switch out
Right.
something like that. So
Which the way that I'm operating, I've got a little bit of everything. Like I've made the energy weapons like to where they're a lot more complex in the way that they work, which they are.
Mm-hmm.
But if you keep them like in shape, they'll fire for indefinitely, pretty much. Um, but I've got heat sinks that some of the weapons that I have is they're fixed because they're like slow firing sniper weapons, stuff like that. But
Sure.
the high cyclic rate weapons, like the ones that are automatic, they have modular heat sinks that you can swap out. So if they get overheated, you just like pull those out, very carefully or eject them or something like that, and then just put fresh ones in, and then you can go for a little bit longer.
Right.
Um,
Also, I should point out that this is you're doing this for a book, a novel series.
right,
Like,
exactly.
so it's not a game. It's not about what's fun. It's about what's cool and what. And it's like it's very secondary to the story, I imagine, right? But it's still something that's fun to.
Right.
It's
Well,
good to design.
what the story's gonna kind of bring to light is, the the brass, the officers in charge in this theater of warfare made the decision. Okay, we're going to drop these guys behind enemy lines, so they need firepower.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to give them like the top of the line stuff because what if they get captured
Right.
or
Then the enemy
killed, and
has
then the
access to
enemy's
their
going
tech
to right.
versus
So
the
they gave
theater.
them baseline stuff, and they gave them energy weapons so that they had like extended, field life basically out of the weapon. However, they didn't think about, these things are so much more complex than slug throwers that, they get beat around or they, get, certain weather conditions or anything like that. They're not going to be usable. So
Right.
the story is actually going to tackle a little bit of like the pitfalls of energy weapons and laser weapons in particular, and they're gonna basically, it's at a certain point in the story, they're just gonna like throw them out and like take the enemy's weapons from them off of their dead bodies and
You
use
kind
them.
of have to. I mean, when you're behind enemy
Right.
lines, at some point you just do that.
But I was thinking about one of the like encounters, like say they come up on, like a giant like scorpion type enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the laser weapons literally do nothing to the point where like it takes the entire squad like focusing fire on it for like an extended period in order just to like take it down, just one. And then they just kind of look at their weapons like, seriously, and they just like throw it down and they pick up the nearest slug thrower, and then it shows them like bam bam bam, and
Wait.
the
When you
thing's
say
dead.
scorpion enemy, you mean like a scorpion person, or like
Yeah,
a?
like full on giant scorpion type, like
Oh, nice.
semi
So yeah, I
sentient.
should probably point out for the stream that Darby's working on probably what I would best describe as a combination of like an alternate reality war story with a lot of grit and a lot of detail to attention, probably mixed with just everything furry that you
Furry,
can
yeah.
think of.
I think Redwall meets Platoon.
Sure, sure. Uh, yeah, and I mean, I believe you said the first book is gonna be about the war, and the second book is just about sexual intercourse between different animals, right? No.
Depends on how well the war goes, right?
No. So you're doing, um, yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually more than anything, I'm interested. I know you'll do well. I wanna fast forward to see who your target audience would be. Like who would be like your fans?
No, bronies. No, bronies are gonna hate me.
Why?
Um,
Why do you think that?
well, because all the horses in my book are kind of like religious sycophants that are into like self mutilation. I
So
guess.
ponies.
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess.
No. I've actually been
No
watching that
alicorns
show a
here.
lot with my girl. It's great for little girls. And
Me too.
no shit talking to any adults about any adults who are into it. I know a few. You know, some of my best friends were Bernies, as we say in these parts.
Well, hey, I'll say this: it's a lot better than some of the other popular shows out there because my daughter's watching
Yeah, I mean,
season 6. So
it's got mostly really good messages. That one episode that I wasn't a huge fan of, which kind of to me like kind of rubbed me a little bit religious of you can't explain. It was one of the early episodes. Like later on, like the research are great, but one of the really early ones, I think they're still looking for that footing. And it was an episode where Pinkie Pie like has this unexplained feeling whenever something's about to happen, something along those lines. And basically
Oh
the
yeah, she
moral of
has
the
like a
yeah
twitchy tail or whatever
yeah
that
yeah
one.
whatever like, the whole
Yeah.
show like doing weird like Animaniacs level stuff like she like the laws of physics are already kind of loose in that world, but even less so with her. So and the gist of the morals of story was basically, sometimes you can't explain things and you should just accept them. And to me, that was the most like anti-scientific, anti-curiosity thing that it just like no, just no, like never not be curious about things. Like why would you
Right.
accept something that's a big deal? It's like fucking study it, like research, do experimentation, fucking apply to scientific, So that thing was that one episode was like really turned me off the show, but everything else has been really good. The whole thing about the morality that they have about friendship and about believing in each other and all that stuff. And, it's good values for the most part.
I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, we were talking about light arms, right?
Yes.
By the way, you can't see on my. You're on your phone, right?
Yeah.
Alright, because if you went to Twitch, I just I pulled up one of the images for one of the characters that I'm planning for the future for Medicus. Um, and she's got this like she's kind of like a paladin for the most part, like weird. I don't know how to describe it. It's like steampunk dark paladins, but with technology. Not quite Warhammer 40K, but like I draw inspiration from her work, and it's like one thing that I really I actually stumbled upon when I was making this concept. So basically, in this world, like the human survivors are fighting like things that are a lot tougher than they are, right? Idea of like these mutants or these demons or whatever the shall have you, right?
Right.
And some of them get like really big and like to the point where like light arms don't really do anything anymore. Like what are you gonna do to like it's like trying to take down an elephant with a 556. Like no.
Right.
So basically everybody's carrying around these like high caliber rifles basically, but the thing is that most normal people like that's basically what they resort to like the shot weapons that just fire big slugs and hope to with enough of them do enough damage and they also do some stuff with pikes and stuff like that. I was talking to another buddy of mine, probably have on the stream at some point to talk about that. But the 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 hero characters, they're kind of superhuman. In a way, like they're stronger than humans are. So, and they're just more badass, and they can take a beating, and they can regenerate. They have regeneration and all that shit. So, this one faction I have, and this is the concept that I'm looking on my screen. Shit, should I send you a link to it? It's up online somewhere. Should I put it up online? You want to see what I'm talking about? I think I showed it to you before. Let me send you the file.
I think I remember which one you're talking about.
Yeah, the armored one, the armored chick.
Yes.
Yeah, let me just send you. Um, Let me just send it to you just so you see it. I'm gonna do this. Oh, you send files. There, sent to you in Google. Maybe I should drop it on the thing. I can probably drop it on.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
You've seen this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, All right. So basically she's carrying around this like kind of like fantasy-ish or medieval almost armor, like just everywhere, just plates of sheets of metal, But also it's a power armor, right? So it's not actually heavy in the traditional sense. There's mechanisms behind this thick plates of metal that actually make it as if like she's not wearing anything. It's a power. It's an exosuit, you know. And but basically, I'm making the guns and the ammunition like really heavy, so she can like actually rapid fire them, or it could be like shotguns, or it could be incendiary, or it could be just slugs. And I'm putting like a bunch of like letting her carry a bunch of heavy ammunition on her back. And something else that I wanted to do is like you see those little arms coming, the extra set of arms coming from the back.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like hydraulics that carry the weapon, and they fashioned them to look like arms, because that imagery of like the Indian gods and shit with more extra arms and shit. Um, so, but yeah, basically, she can just fucking punch something, or she can grab that thing and just fire and stab. Basically, the whole thing has like four movements and shit. So
That's cool.
So that would be like a frontline, big demon taker downer kind of thing. But I'm for the most part I'm sticking to just projectiles for the most part. There is a small place where I'm not, but I'll get into that. It's like with robots and lasers and plasma weapons and shit. And I did want to talk to you about that, but honestly, like most because resources are low, and this is kind of where my entry point is into the game and the gameplay, where the focus is really on melee, because you don't have a lot of resources to be firing a lot of guns all the time. You know what I mean?
Yep. Sort of like the shovel launcher in Far Cry 5.
Did you just say shovel launcher?
Yes, it did.
The fuck? I haven't played that one. I haven't played
I recommend it if you can get it for cheap.
I don't know. I haven't played single player games in a long time. Like, I don't know. For me, like, I'm trying to. I only like games that are co-op. Like, I don't like playing PvP, and I don't like playing single player. I like games that are basically just a social bonding ritual with somebody you don't have to actually look at. We're
I
gonna
know what
hang
you
out.
mean.
We're gonna play a game. We're gonna cooperate. Let's go, and then I'll still be in my room just doing yours. And, fuck off. That's why I'm making this game co-op.
Nice.
So, so how are you solving the? I guess like for her, like really, like all guns have some risk of exploding. I guess because technically there's a bunch of gunpowder, right?
Yeah, but I mean, the likelihood of actual like encased ammunition like that,
Yeah.
igniting is very, very low unless she's hit
Yeah, I
by like
don't
a
like
fireball.
need. The only case I remember of it being an actual risk was, and I don't actually think it was a risk. I think because yeah, I'm thinking of like the M245. I want to say or 247. One of those. The machine guns, the light machine guns.
Mm-hmm.
You know which one I'm talking about? The mini me or like
I
the negative version I fired, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And
We talking
you
about the
you
ones
always
with the
carry basically you carry 300 rounds. Like you carry the I'm sorry the fucking drum has 300 rounds. I think this has been many years ago, so I could be wrong. But the drum carries 300 rounds, and you always carry an extra barrel with you because what happens is that the barrel gets overheated after I don't know. So basically, I think every 150 rounds, like you just have to change the barrel because it gets too hot. And I can't remember if the risk was that the barrel gets melted or it was blah, or it gets so hot that the ammunition explodes in it, or both.
I've heard both. I think a lot of the issue was the gases that were left over in the firing chamber were so hot that before you even the primer even got hit by the firing pin, it was so hot that the powder was actually igniting inside the rounds before they pulled the trigger. So it was like auto firing.
Damn. So, but that's what, but yeah, but that's pretty much the extent of the damage when you, because it's a round. It's not like when you're talking capacitor, you're talking like a grenade going off in your face.
Yeah,
right?
like they said, those huge capacitors they use for the hyper, if one of those were to be dropped from like a certain height, like say 10 feet or something like that, and hit the ground, it would basically discharge with enough force to blow somebody in half.
Okay, but what radius are we talking about here?
I'm not sure, they didn't specify, but I'm assuming.
Well, the big risk would be like the big risk would be the shrapnel. So it's kind of hard to say depending on the angle and all that shit. So. But if it's that force, then you probably have a kill radius at least of more than a grenade. Definitely more than a grenade. With for the big one.
And it also depends on the size of the capacitors and the amount of charge in them. But I've got, I'm going to have like several instances where I've planned out in advance that some of the larger weapons require more power and more capacitors. So they actually have those built into a backpack with an umbilical connected to the emitter weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have a larger fusion reactor built into the backpack. Well, if one of those loses its containment, you basically go into, nuclear chain reaction meltdown, and it will literally like melt straight into the ground and like take them with it. Like they basically just see this flash and then just a bunch of molten slag.
All this shit is amazing for a video game. Like you have an enemy and like if you hit get a critical on something important, then that shit ever just melt into the fucking ground. But like you think that would happen like in real life, like energy weapons for like infantry, like that feels like it's not worth it.
I don't see infantry weapons ever being energy. I think they're gonna keep it projectile, and even then, you say projectile, and we're thinking, okay, what if they do rail weapons or coil weapons? And
I'm thinking rail or coil because.
But you see, the problem with rail weapons is it's not just the energy; it's you do the mathematics on the velocity of the projectile that's driven out the rails. I forget what that is. It the Lorentz force, or am I? I'm trying to think of what force.
We're not talking about like fantasy railguns here. We're talking like real.
Okay, but still, if you're talking,
it's not light speed.
No, it's not light speed. But still, if you're talking, a certain amount of velocity, that's greater than what we're doing with conventional ballistic weapons, firearms. It's still going to knock you backwards pretty hard. Like they said that at current velocities that they're using off of the battleships and cruisers, if you tried to get a velocity like that out of a small arm, it's going to pretty much knock somebody back at over 100 miles an hour.
See, I was wondering about that. Well, I mean, when you miniaturize it, I mean, because old school, you had normal guns and you had the miniaturized version and the shipborne version, right, or the tankborne version.
Right.
It's all the same physics. It's just a different scale. The forces are different, and it's not linear.
Right.
Because what's the difference between like a pistol and a tank? It's the same base technology. The same forces are at play here. It's just different scale, so you need exponentially more stopping force to not break the tank apart.
Correct.
But like a 556, your shoulder will do. Not your shoulder, but your what do you call it, tendon, whatever, the chest. thingy. I'm an artist, I should know this, but I don't. The pec to
Well,
shoulder area situation.
right. You could also think along these lines too. It also depends on the positioning of the barrel as well. Because I mean, you think a vector, they've got the barrel right in line with the wrist as opposed to above it, like in most firearms. And the amount of, you know, force uh, directed down the arm and everything is more centered, so it's more controllable and it's evenly dispersed down the arm, so it doesn't actually go fully into the shoulder because your whole arm is,
That's true.
and that way it's a lot more controllable because the barrel is right in line with your wrist.
So when it comes to here's the so okay so with normal ballistics right now today, just explosive explosive ballistics. You have the explosion happening, and that's what's giving you the kickback, right?
Well, what's given it the kickback is the counteraction of the actual like propulsion of the slug.
Yeah,
Like if you have the same
it's like a
amount of,
momentary afterburner in the direction of the barrel, kind of deal, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, okay, think about it this way. You can have the same size explosion with the same amount of gunpowder projecting two different projectiles, right?
Right.
But the projectile with the larger mass, depending on, I mean, obviously the velocities are going to be different. So the overall like effect that's thrown back on you is probably going to be about the same.
Okay.
But as a rule of thumb, like if you have two projectiles with the same velocity, the one with the greater mass is the one that's going to give you the greater kickback, right?
Right.
Like it's just counteraction of the movement of the mass and the force exerted. But I mean, I guess it would require more powder to move that projectile that's
Mm-hmm.
larger at the same
Right,
velocity
to
as the smaller
change
one.
because
So
every action has an equal and opposite reaction, so you gotta
it
calculate.
you know, potato potato. So I mean, it's either, it's equally just as much like the mass of the projectile as the amount of explosive in the cartridge.
Okay, well, so that's for traditional ballistics,
Right.
uh, and that makes sense to me. So I assumed that of the way because of the way rail and coil weapons work, you actually have zero kickback because it's just magnets accelerating it forward.
False.
So explain that to
The
me.
magnets are accelerating it forward, but you're still moving. Like the mechanism is moving an object with mass, so you're going to have a counter movement, in reverse of the mechanism,
So
and
what's
that's
getting pushed
then going
back
to,
there?
what's getting pushed back is I looked at a diagram one time, but that the railgun on that battleship that we've got, uh, they explained it as like you're throwing the projectile out based on the outward, like you. Okay, when you have a railgun, you have two rails, right?
You're
And there's
breaking
going
up
to
a
need to
little
be.
bit.
Let's see, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think so. Let's try it.
All right. Well, when you've got a rail weapon, you've got two rails, they're parallel.
Okay, it's much better.
They can either be enclosed in a barrel or not. I mean, I don't really think it matters as long as they've got a bridge. I'm not quite sure if I recall what the technical name for this is, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a projectile, and if the projectile wants to remain aerodynamic, then you're going to have it in a sabot sleeve. And the sabot sleeve, fits perfectly between those rails and has full contact with both sides. And it's got
Right,
to
it's not
be
floating there.
right. And it's got to be anchored to the rear end to it's like a bridge piece made out of conductive metal, right? And that completes the circuit between the two rails.
So
So
it's
that's
almost like a
actually what's
wheel of a
getting,
car on the road, right? So the wheel's going forward, but the friction is pushing backwards. So if the road wasn't solid, you'll be like a carpet flying backwards.
um, sort of, but it's kind of an electromagnetic
I'm just
force
trying
that
to
they're dealing with.
simplify it because I'm not intelligent at all.
Okay, well, okay, think of it this way. You've got your two rails on each side, and you've got the bridge, and then in the back you've got your power source with the wires connecting it with, you know, the trigger mechanism and everything else, and that forms a circular circuit that goes from power source down one rail, across the bridge behind the projectile, and then up the other rail back to the power source, right? So what happens is when you feed power into that and you activate that current, it produces an outward force. It's sort of the same type of phenomenon as like centripetal force, only it's instead of an inward force, it's an outward force, and it's electromagnetic.
Okay.
But what happens is you activate that trigger mechanism, and what it does is it releases that bridge. The bridge is fixed, but then as soon as you release it, that force throws that bridge outwards at, you know, theoretically nearly the speed of light, because this force is a very, very strong force that they're dealing with.
But we have mass, we have air resistance, we have all this stuff.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But what is happening is you're not actually accelerating the projectile itself unless it's fully magnetic and it's making direct contact with those rails, which means it wouldn't be aerodynamic. So if you want it to be aerodynamic, then that's not going to be the case. And what you're doing is you're using this bridge as a pusher, as like a catapult.
Okay.
So once you activate that, it pushes and throws that outwards. And once that happens, you've got that same force is pushing, you know, to the sides and to the back.
Yes.
And so that's where you're getting your kickback from.
Yes.
Is not only the counteraction of the mass, but you've also, you know, you've got that bridge thrown forward, and then it's either going to stop or it's going to have some sort of it's going to have some sort of a recoil to it if it stays attached to the weapon.
Right. So that was. So I think my assumption about the no kickback thing came from me misunderstanding how the weapon works, because so theoretically, if you could have a bullet or a projectile that was entirely magnetic, and you wouldn't need all this stuff, then theoretically you wouldn't have kickback then, right?
I'm not exactly sure about that.
Basically, if the bridge was a projectile.
Well, so the bridge was behaving as a projectile, yes. But I'm not sure if it's so much the counteraction of the actual projectiles, or if it's the EM force that's being exerted, you know, outwards. Because coil gun, I mean, if you look at YouTube videos and you see somebody making a high-powered coil gun that you have to charge from an AC outlet, and the capacitors are like
shockwave?
I don't know about that, but I mean, you can tell when people are firing these things, they got kickback, and it's just a coil gun. So, I mean, it's not much. So I don't know if the kickback on rail and coil weapons would be as great as, you know, conventional ballistic weapons that have the same muzzle velocities and stopping power.
Yeah.
But they definitely would have some. So there would have to be something that was controllable. Which is why I was trying to figure out, like, you know, if you're thinking, okay, let's go rail weapons for the small arms, because I'm going to have both. I mean, I think they both.
And I think, you know, and I think I probably have rail too. I think all my conventional quote unquote weapons are going to be rail weapons. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe probably both, actually. And I want to circle back to energy weapons because I've had this picture up for a while. But yeah, so and you're still, I'm in terms of describing them, that would still pretty much sound the same, because you're still gonna get the supersonic boom. I'm curious about the kickback though. I'm curious if it would be the same. But if it's not, then I guess it would make sense, like for the one character that had those hydraulic kind of things that are holding the gun and are taking the kickback.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, that would be a cool visual as well.
I'm sorry?
That would be a cool visual as well, to have the hydraulics like taking all the recoil, and then
I love that about
the hands on the grips
tank barrels too,
stationary.
or ship barrels, you know, where they like go back and then like come back forward, kind of deal.
Yeah, Actually, if you remember that sniper rifle that I designed for Cinder, how I did the 3 rails on that one, I actually almost did 4, and I was thinking about doing that.
You know, to this day, every time I think a light, I'm blanking, a light fucking rail weapon, that's the first image that comes to mind because I love that design so much. Find it and show people. So well done.
Yeah, the only thing that you have to figure out is, you know, if you have 3 rails, I mean, I don't think that would really, you know, work in terms of actual like electronics, like actually figuring out the fields and stuff. I don't think 3 would work. You didn't
like
definitely
we gotta
have to
have four.
Yeah, you would have to have at least 4 if you wanted to go up that high. But what I was thinking was doing 4, but doing 2 and 2, and then have the barrel rotate halfway, so that, you know, there's a secondary mechanism like operating, like loading up different bridges from the bottom and then firing from the other position.
Oh, like a weird reverse rail revolver.
Kind of, yeah.
I like it.
But that was the one idea way back then. I just had the sketch still in that one file when I was looking the other day, so that's the only reason I remembered that.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking right now. I don't know. Let me show you this image. So this is I'm looking at an image that I made of this like cyborg character. So I think she has a human brain and some human. I think maybe the nervous system. I haven't decided. I haven't decided. But you know, very very advanced cybernetics going on, and I have her in the image. Let me actually shoot it over to you so you'll see what I'm looking at. Um, all right, tell me when you got it.
All right, it says I got it. Okay, I got it.
Okay, so you see how her arm opens up,
Mm-hmm.
or her forearm. So I was thinking like a miniaturized like. And I use these buzzwords that I don't know what they mean, so that's why I'm happy I get to talk to you about this stuff. So I've decided that she has a plasma caster coming out of her wrist there. All right.
Okay.
So can it be a plasma caster?
I mean, it can be a plasma caster if you want it to be a plasma.
I know, but how do I explain it?
Oh, I mean, basically, my understanding of plasma weapons, as you know, they are in science fiction, actual plasma weapons are
like flamethrowers. Right?
Basically, if you think about laser weapons, actually are plasma weapons, technically, because what they're doing is they're in the lasing chamber. If it's like, say, what is it, a xenon helium laser? They're actually, if you use a electric discharge through the middle, sort of like what they do with fluorescent light bulbs, that's what excites the molecules of the helium and the xenon in the laser and in the lasing chamber, and that's what creates the light, and then it bounces back and forth until, you know, it all lines up and goes through the what do they call that, the aperture or whatever, and it creates the beam, right? Well, you know, basically that laser is traveling down, you know, a path, at least for a little bit of a way. It's heating the air around it to, you know, ionize it into plasma. So it's actually like a stream of plasma, basically, and that's
So
what a lot of burning lasers.
Like super focused light that everybody romanticizes lasers to be, because it's going through atmosphere, it's going through the shit. It's doing that.
Right. Well, I think that's a lot of the reason why a lot of higher powered lasers have a burning effect. Like, they don't just cut, they burn. And the burning, I think, is from the contact of the plasma.
Because really, they should just be really hot cutty things. Like,
right.
Basically like super hot needle, but it's so hot that it burns the air
well,
around it.
And that's one of the things that I was researching for electro lasers because I was thinking about electro lasers because I was looking at different types of lasers, and electro lasers actually do that. They use a higher powered laser to create a channel of plasma, and then after that channel of plasma is created between the emitter and the target, it then initiates an electric arc at the source, and it actually like basically near instantly travels from the source through the plasma like lightning, like a lightning bolt, and then it goes all the way to the target.
What is it called? I want to see a video of this. It sounds awesome. Electro laser?
I don't know electro laser. I don't know if I've seen a really, really good video of it in a long time, but I remember I did the research and I've got it written down, in my plethora of documents. So I know I read it somewhere.
That looks super unimpressive. That looks way cooler in my head when you describe it.
Well, it can be, you know what I mean? Like that's the beauty of writing a book, is you can make it sound incredibly awesome and somebody's going to picture it in their head, but in actuality,
well, yeah, good for you, motherfucker, but I'm going to keep game. But you do have a good knack to make it sound awesome. Shit. So would you say in sci-fi, they use laser, they use plasma, they use ion cannons, plasma casters, and all that? Really, in reality, all this would basically be the same, wouldn't it? Just the really thin beam, hot
because I mean, you can't have like a Star Wars blaster.
Yeah, I know, and that's the fantasy. They just want, basically, people want to see tracers, like they want to see shit that looks like tracers.
Mm-hmm.
But that's too slow for light-based weapons.
Right, and one really neat thing that I play around with is for my like pulse lasers, as I term them, you can actually have a rotating mirror inside of the lasing chamber. And what that does is it blocks and releases the light out the aperture and pulses, and it'll basically look like the laser is flickering. So you can actually like use that to not only conserve heat emission, but you can use that sort of like your targeting phase, and then you just like lock it in and do like the full beam for like the actual damaging phase or whatever if you want.
Yeah, you can choose basically. Oh, nice! I like that. It's like full auto and
exactly. Yeah. Okay. But I mean, obviously, I'm going to go a little bit off of the realistic path with that, and actually make it like it's an automatic rather than just like being a beam that's flickering.
Right.
Because obviously a flickering beam is not going to be nearly as damaging as the constant exposure, but
And that's when it comes to me, because like the visual aspect plays a huge role in the visual media that I'm in. So it's like, do I make all energy weapons just instant, like, or do I do the Star Wars blaster thing? That's basically just a tracer, but energy and explosive. Like I want to educate myself so I can make that a conscious decision rather than just doing it in the dark and because it looks cool. Which there's nothing wrong with that either, But I am curious. Like if I could justify it somehow, I would. But if not, then I'll just fucking bullshit.
But I mean, if you really want to make this like a plasma weapon, you would have to have a gas chamber that you are exciting with a laser or some other type of energy, like energy input, and you have to excite all of that and heat it to a plasma state. Which, I mean, you're thinking, okay, maybe it's maybe you've got something nuclear going on, like if you
I'm
have
thinking
some sort
maybe like her actual core is maybe like a miniaturized nuclear reactor.
Okay.
So
then
she has that energy. Maybe I can do it.
Right. Like, so if she, vents the excess heat or whatever, like instead of having like a coolant chamber or, some sort of like a heat sink type situation going on in
what if the weapon is
whatever, like her thighs.
Anyway,
but yeah, if you do that, then she could vent that out this weapon to superheat, like say a gas chamber in the weapon itself, like in her forearm, And then I would say you'd want to go ahead and do like a high-powered laser anyway as like a preemptive thing, like a targeting thing, and have that be like an instantaneous like power pulse, like she uses at the target, and then when she activates, like it actually like full power laser, and it creates that plasma channel like I was talking, and then the plasma pocket could actually travel down that channel, fairly rapidly. Obviously, it's going to have a limited range before it dissipates, but
that sounds really cool, actually.
That way you would actually have like an avenue for it to travel instead of like instantly basically detonating right as soon as it leaves the weapon.
Right.
Because
so it would be almost like a fireball sniper rifle with laser pointer, right?
Yeah, basically.
I can do that. I can live with that. That looks pretty cool in my head. Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, it would probably be closer to a want to say like maybe a carbine like range.
Oh, this is a side-scrolling beat 'em up, dude.
Okay, well, I mean, you can take liberties with that if you want. I mean, I was just giving you, my determination of actual,
No, I'm just saying range wouldn't be a problem because there's only so much visible on the screen.
But yeah, she would, you'd have the laser pointer and then just like boom, and then it would just travel along that laser for what, 2-3 frames, and bam.
Yeah, I can definitely. What color would you make it? I'm leaning towards orange, but it would probably be blue.
Well, I mean, it would kind of depend on the gas that she had in. I mean, if she's got a specialized gas in her forearm that she's heating, then it would be a certain color. But if you're just doing,
what color would you do it?
Like atmospheric and stuff. I mean,
if it's atmospheric, let's start there. If it's just air, okay?
Okay. Well, if you're thinking regular atmosphere, it's what, mostly nitrogen, like water, oxygen. I'm trying to think. I think, don't they say that the let's see, younger stars.
It does actually matter because you let people the option, probably
Right.
the option to customize it anyway. But I'm curious.
Default, I would just go for like a deep orange or so. Just I'm thinking of like the sun and like aging stars that start burning like the higher elements. Because I mean, the sun basically is plasma.
Yeah.
But right now, I think it's still burning hydrogen technically. But the older stars, if I remember correctly, from all of my years of science classes that are probably now obsolete anyway, so it doesn't matter. But they said that the older stars that start burning like the heavier elements before they, end up collapsing and going supernova, they tend to get more towards the red and infrared end of the spectrum before they do so.
Right.
So, because they're cooling down.
Right. Yeah, I think I
just do like an orangish.
I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson mention that at some point. Not myself. All right. Yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking. Just defaulting to like orange and having her kind of have like a nuke reactor core kind of thing, but like a mini one that it goes off. Not everybody dies. It's like you said. Like you melt your two soldiers melt down and something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. So yeah, man. I think I'm about ready to call it a night here. But I want to do this again. Actually, this is really fun to talk about.
All right.
I was actually skimping out on doing the laundry stuff. I gotta go back to it. But yeah, well, let's maybe I'll do it tomorrow.
All right.
Dude.
Yeah, I'll let you know what all I'm doing tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. I'll do it. So anything you want to promote? I don't have that many viewers right now, but go for it.
Anything I want to what? Sorry, broke up.
Anything you want to promote?
Not particularly. No. I don't have anything that's like finished and readable, like posted anywhere. So
yeah, well, you're getting there though. But
I'm getting there.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Maybe I'll release it a chapter at a time for 99 cents.
Is that do people do this?
Oh, some people do it. But I'm going to try to go the traditional route in the meantime, see if I can actually get published by an, because then, fingers crossed, I could eventually theoretically get a job at a game company writing to require you be published by something.
That'd be legit.
But who knows?
Yes. Well, I believe in you, buddy. You can do it. You can do
Yeah,
it.
it's just a matter of time management, which I'm horrible at right now.
This is the great enemy.
Yep.
Okay, so to any of our viewers, thanks for tuning in, and you can find me on patreon.com/underscore Facebook.com/underscore Twitter.com/underscore probably underscore Mark on ArtStation. I'll just Google underscore Mark. You'll find me. So, and thanks, Darby, for joining in today. And,
No
see you
problem.
next time. All right, bro.
Yep.